Hello, everybody. It's Sylvie. Welcome or welcome back to Tarot Magpie. I hope you're doing all kinds of good today. I am going to be talking about the decks that I have said goodbye to. This video was selected by my lovely nestlings and fledglings over on Patreon. I will have a link in the description if you're interested in joining us over there. There's lots of good stuff. But in this one, I am going to be talking about the decks that I have moved on. We all go through phases in our tarot practice as it evolves. Not every deck is meant to last. So today I am diving into the decks I've said goodbye to and sharing why they no longer fit into my tarot practice. So if that sounds good to you, let's get into it. Okay, these are in no particular order. First up is the Ask the Witch Tarot Wisdom from a Timeless Coven. And this was mostly a cardstock issue. Also, these ugly backs, like what a wasted opportunity. This was mostly a cardstock issue. They're huge, they're glossy, they were really hard to shuffle, and that put me off using them on like a, I don't know, incidental everyday basis. Those mean different things, but I hated working with it physically is the point. The artwork is really cool. I remember I really liked the courts especially were cool, and I think this is the Queen of Swords here with this yellow background and then where she's gripping the sword. Like, I just thought that was really cool. It's a Rider-Waite-Smith based deck for the most part, but the major arcana is inspired by different witches from different like folklore and cultures, and it kind of worked and it kind of didn't. I think sometimes it felt a little bit shoehorned in. Sometimes the characterization, I guess, of these figures felt a little bit one note, and I think that is just the nature of trying to fit something into an existing system. Like the major arcana of the tarot, I'm trying to remember, like I think strength is probably Joan of Arc. So they were not all witches in the sense that that's not what they would all be called in their time or in their culture. So yeah, it was a little bit, felt a little bit forced in places. I think is this Baba Yaga? I think I just had better decks was the reason I really got rid of this one. I wasn't reaching for it, which is the case for most of these. I don't think I hated anything, but I just wasn't reaching for it. I didn't like the cardstock, and the guidebook was good, but also not always good. The guidebook wasn't enough of a reason for me to keep it around, is my point. And I think I just found the major arcana, it was not executed as well as it could have been. And so that I think was one of the reasons I let this go. But ultimately it was a cardstock issue. The cardstock wouldn't bother me if the deck itself was fantastic. Neither element was fantastic. And I thought, well, I'm not gonna hurt my hands and fight with a deck that isn't like worth it, essentially. So that was the Ask the Witch that I don't think was in my collection for very long. But next up, the, I can never say this, Tarot de Carlotydes. I've heard it pronounced a few different ways. This is a Fournier deck. You know, I love a Fournier deck. The size is so good. And this is really fun. The backs here are really pretty. It's got kind of references to lots of different things. We've got the Princess and the Pea here for the Four of Swords. This is Klimt's The Kiss for the lovers. There's Bowie in here somewhere. Like, it's really pretty. It was kind of like quirky, which I enjoyed. Can we see some more cards? You can't really see, but I liked the style. I liked the kind of whimsy and the quirkiness. But I think it just didn't well, I think maybe it was too quirky, too whimsical. Also, it had a rubbish guidebook. It had one of those multi-language little white books where there was like a sentence for each card. It didn't really discuss the artwork, and I think that made it difficult for me to connect to it because some of the references I get, but I didn't really understand why for that card in particular. Some of the references made a lot of sense. Some of them felt like they kind of took me out of it. So again, it's just one that I found I wasn't reaching for. And when it came to downsizing my collection before I moved earlier this year, which is when and why I said goodbye to a lot of these, when it came to downsizing my collection, I was like, I don't need this. And obviously, I don't need any deck, but it just wasn't doing anything particularly special for me to hold on to it. which again, like I say, kind of a shame because I think it's really pretty. It's really pretty, but so are so many decks. So this one had to go. All right, so this Soul Cats Tarot, I wanted to love this so badly. The illustrator, Adam Ohlers, is the illustrator for the Three Trees indie brand tarot decks, like the Oak Ash and Thorn, and I think the new one is the Heartwood. Oh my goodness, they're just delightful. I love, love, love his style of illustration. I do want the Smoke Ash and Embers from Three Trees. Not to like go on too much of a tangent here, but I do want that deck because dragons. But anyway, I really wanted to love this. The illustrations are beautiful. I love cats. The color palette is just delightful. I would love if we could find more photos. The color palette's gorgeous. It's this like twilighty, kind of autumn wintry color palette. It's totally beautiful. Like I say, cats. I love cats. Happy to have a cat deck. And I thought I really would like the sort of fantasy element. Like the way that this is done is it's cats doing cat things, but then you can see, especially in like the courts and some of the majors, like the I think these were the pages. They all have these little flight goggles on, which was really cute. And some of the cards have more of like a fantasy element. Like here we've got this winged cat, and it just didn't work for me in the way that I was hoping it would. I did use this as my daily draw kind of study-ish deck for a month, and I didn't really care for the guidebook. I think this is it's a Lisa Robertson guidebook, and there's a couple of her decks guidebooks in here. She does a few of the Llewellyn big box ones, which is what this is. I think I just don't get on with her guidebooks, but I didn't really care for the guidebook, which I think is what first put me off, and then I just found I wasn't really clicking with it. And this is one that I kind of miss having because it's so pretty, but I think I would rather have one of his indie decks that he did with Three Trees Tarot. So, anywho, I think maybe it was the magicification of the cats. It towed a line between being realistic and being fantastical that just missed the mark for me personally. If I can remember correctly, I couldn't figure out what the tone of the deck was, like what kind of readings it would be good for in my personal practice. It just never seemed to kind of fit into anything. It just never seemed to be the right deck for anything I was doing a reading for. So it just never really found a place in my collection. Okay, next up, this is the Mystic Martian Oracle. I still wish I loved this deck because look at the illustrations. It's so cool. It's so cool. And I remember I saw this particular card in obviously in the previews here and I thought that it would work for me differently than it did. I think the thing that really put me off this that I could never get over was there's kind of like a star CD, and maybe that might be what this is. I don't know a lot about like the lore of like all the star CD bullshit, but there was just too much of that in the deck for me. I couldn't get over it in the end, so I moved it along. I love the illustration style, but the guidebook, again, like I say, bit star seedy, just bit not the right tone. And especially with Oracle decks, the guidebook is really important for me. So I tried, I want to love it because the artwork is so cool, but it wasn't the one for me, unfortunately. And it is the right kind of setup for me for an Oracle deck. We've got the title and then three keywords, which is my favorite kind of Oracle deck because I can read it and then I can go to the guidebook if I want more information. But it just didn't work out. Okay, next to the 8 Coins Tattoo Tarot. I was hoping this would be the tattoo style tarot deck for me, and it was not. I think that I found the art style was too inconsistent throughout the deck. And if I remember correctly, this deck was a kind of project for this artist to improve their drawing. Like you can see down here, drawing number 61. And so they're labeled as to the order that they produced the artworks in. And so naturally there is a development in their art style over the course of making 78 whole pieces of art for these cards. It came off to me as just feeling a bit too incohesive. I have since bought the Bonefire Tarot, which has that like traditional tattoo style to the artwork, and that's a deck that I really get on with. But there was just something a little bit missing from this, and I wonder if it's because it was started as a drawing project, not so much as a tarot project. I could be misremembering that. It just felt a little bit like 78 pieces of artwork instead of a tarot deck, which sounds so annoying and pretentious of me. But, you know, it didn't click for me. I found myself never reaching for it. I didn't really, it fell kind of flat in a reading. I just wasn't really getting much from it. Even though like the elements are there, but yeah, it felt more like an art project than a tarot project. And I think I moved this one on fairly quickly. Speaking of moving on fairly quickly, the Aquarian Tarot, this is the new edition just because it has more images. But the Aquarian Tarot also did not work for me. I got the little tin edition and it's just so washed out. At least the edition I bought was. I really like the mages. You can see how they're like movie posters. I just think they look so cool. That's like Art Deco style. But it was so washed out. I don't know if this edition is any better. I have heard that the like original printings from, I think this was published in the late 60s. The original printings are better apparently, but I don't have the money to be finding an original printing of a deck that I'm not even sure that I like. So this one very quickly I moved on because it just was so washed out and there was no color to it. I have realized the error of my ways that the Morgan Greer simply is the like classic Rider-Waite-Smith redraw for me. I feel like there's a few. There's like the Aquarian, there's the Morgan Greer, maybe like the Palladini and a couple of others that I'm sure I'm forgetting. But yeah, the Morgan Greer is my, well, that was 70s. I think this was late 60s, but they're sort of contemporary to each other. But like, if everything was in the style of these majors, I'd have loved it. The majors are so cool. But then, yeah, the minors were just so washed out and there was kind of nothing to them, which was a shame, but very quickly moved this out of my collection. Sometimes I know very quickly, and like, yeah, this one just isn't what I thought it would be and isn't what I kind of need it to be. Some of them take a little bit longer, but this very quickly moved back out of my collection. All right, the Mermaid Tarot. This is another Llewellyn deck with a Lisa Robertson guidebook. This is so pretty, and this is the other one that maybe I'm like, oh, I kind of still wish I had this because the art is just gorgeous. This one though, I'm not mad about moving it on because I moved this on to a friend who I know really was excited to have it. So I'm, happy with having moved it out of my collection. This is the closest I have to regretting, but I don't really regret it because I don't know that I would have used it much. It's just that it's so pretty that I loved doing like a big spread with this, but I just never really reached for it. I think it's too thematic, and what I've learned is that a heavily thematic Rider-Waite-Smith clone doesn't usually work for me. I'm saying that. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm having like a think about my collection, but I think I've either got like clones, like the Tarot Collectibles decks that I like that are just an edit of Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork, basically, or I like something that's a little bit more out of the box, whereas this is just like the Rider-Waite-Smith if it was mermaids. And I don't get a whole ton from that, typically speaking, but it is really beautiful. But again, it just didn't work out for me. I never really clicked with it. And also the guidebook was meh to me. I think I just don't really get on with Lisa Robertson's guidebooks, which again is fine. I'm not saying they're bad, I'm just saying they don't click for me personally. And this is another Lisa Robertson guidebook. This is the Cirque de Tarot, which is another Llewellyn one. Oh, excellent. Benneville Wen did a review of this, so we've got loads of images. This is some of the majors. Like, it's so pretty. I loved the color palette and the art style in general, I think is so pretty. And this is a circus theme. Still adore this Empress. I think she's wonderful. And like it was really cool because like here with the Hierophant, we have this like kind of techie side of the behind the scenes, and I think that was present in a few other cards as well. What else have we got? But here, this was one of my big issues was the court cards because it was the same card with like different color palettes across each suit. So these are the 4 different pages. There is nothing to say which one is which suit except for like The colors, this has like some like scaly stuff on the costume. There's a sword here, but like otherwise there's nothing to really differentiate them. And quartz are frequently a big pet peeve of mine. Here we go. Here's our knights and our queens. And it's the same figure throughout the different stages of getting ready for the performance, if I remember correctly. And I thought that was a really like clever, like it was a really cool take on it. That's not something I've seen before, but in practice reading for me just didn't land because there's nothing to differentiate the knights from each other except the colors. They're not showing any difference in like if we're to personify our court cards, there's no difference in personality. There's no difference in like the characterization. They're not doing anything differently. They don't look like they have different priorities or different, they're not embodying their suits in any kind of different way. Like they're like a copy paste of each other, which is one of my issues with court cards. Usually it is that the page, knight, queen and king of a court look the same as each other. Here it's that the pages all look the same as each other, the knights all look the same as each other, so on. But it still bothers me and is not my style of reading. We can see they are really beautiful, and I enjoy very much the artistry. But again, just didn't click for me in reading. We had these like steampunky pentacles. I still think they're gorgeous, and I'm looking at this like maybe I'm sad I let this go. Again, not really, because I gave it or I sold it to somebody who is a friend. And so it's very cool to know that like she's got this deck from me. Like that's fun and I don't regret it at all. I think it's one that I want because it's pretty. I wanted it because it's pretty and I still kind of want it because it's pretty, even though I know it doesn't work for me in practice. The lesson here really was it doesn't matter if I think each individual card is a really good copy of that card. Like I think this is a really cool Six of Pentacles. I think this is a good Five of Cups. I think this is a good Four of Pentacles. The Pentacle suit is actually pretty good. But like I can think that individual cards are really good versions of the cards, and that doesn't mean I'm going to get on with it in practice. That was also true of the Unfolding Path Tarot. I had the indie edition. It's since got mass market, which I think is great because I think it's absolutely beautiful. Do we see like they're gorgeous, gorgeous illustrations? And the quartz in this deck, some of my favorites. The Queen of Wands, here she is, the Queen of Wands, absolutely stunning, absolutely beautiful. And the aces in this deck were also completely gorgeous. So I loved the cards and I thought each individual card was a good representation of that card. This is when, and I have since changed my attitude to or change my sort of process for how I decide to buy a deck. I used to watch flip throughs. I used to be like, yes, I like that Fool. Yes, I like that Chariot. Yes, I like that Four of Pentacles, so on and so forth. And I have since realized that I need to think about the vibe of the deck as a whole, which maybe is obvious, maybe it's not. I really liked this. Like a lot of the symbols are there and the expressions. This is, we're getting to the main point, which is that I don't like people looking at me. I didn't realize that until I had this deck because everybody looks like a real person. The expressions are so good, like the facial expressions in these figures, so good. Personally, hate reading with it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I also can't do a contemporary deck, which this kind of is. Not so much in the cards they've got here as examples, but like I remember the oh, it was the seven or the eight of Pentacles is somebody like a ballet dancer training. Somebody's carrying shopping bags and one of them, like it's quite a contemporary deck, quite a modern deck, especially in the minors. And that coupled with very real looking facial expressions, I take that card too literally. I can only see what is on that card. I can't, I mean, I could, but it stops me, it gets in the way of me considering what else this card could represent. If I'm just seeing somebody training hard at ballet, all I can think about is perfecting a skill and not the other kind of subtleties and nuances of the Eight of Pentacles. So I took this one too literally. I just found it hard to read with, which is ridiculous because I was like, oh, this card is so clear. It's so obvious what's going on. The people are so expressive. It must be a really easy reader. And I'm sure for a lot of people that is the case. For me personally, not so much. Really struggled with it. Really struggled moving this one on. I sat on this for like a year partly because it was the indie edition. And then once I saw that it was coming out mass market, I was like, okay, I can sell it because I can always get myself another copy if I decide I want it back. But absolutely gorgeous. Did not want to let this go, but it just didn't. I wasn't reaching for it, and I was like, it's literally taking up space. So I moved it along. This was a similar experience. So this is the Tarot at the End of the Rainbow, which is a low Scarabeo deck. Okay, so here's a few more pictures. We can see it's this like magical fantasy Rider-Waite-Smith based deck. We've got a rainbow in each card, which I really enjoyed. This is justice. This is a really good example. This is such a clear justice, right? This is such an obvious justice. This is a really obvious strength. The wheel is clearly the wheel. Like the fool is the fool. It's so obvious it's so obvious what each card is meant to represent. But again, I just found it got in the way of me reading it. I don't know why that is, but I just didn't enjoy reading with it. I found it I found it difficult somehow, and it doesn't make sense because it's a really clear reader. And I think that just goes to show that a clear reader is not necessarily an easy reader, at least not for every person. There is more that makes a deck a kind of easy reader for me, or an intuitive reader is maybe a better way to put that. This is a really clear illustration of the Rider-Waite-Smith, but that didn't make it an easy reader for me personally. And that is the same with this one, which is the Art of Adventure Tarot, which I really thought was so cool. I still think it's so cool. I adore this illustration style. I adore the colors. I thought it was a really good representation. I still do. I think it's really clever. It's kind of fun. It's interesting. I think some of the details, like the way the Emperor's legs are wrapped around the throne. I think this lovers is really fun with this angel figure. Like Justice here just looks really cool. Like it's really cool, it's really fun, it's really interesting. I really liked this death card. I liked how it went from being like it's a skeletal horse and it's a real horse, and that kind of illustration of a transition I thought was really cool. Again, this was an issue of it being a clear reader, but not an easy reader. Like here with the Two of Swords, we're all twisted up with the indecision. We don't know which way to go. Like it's so obvious what each card is pointing to, but I just couldn't click with it personally in my practice. And I think, again, this is one where I look at it card by card and I'm like, yeah, that's a great Queen of Wands. That's a really good Ace of Swords, so on and so forth. Again, we had this like steampunky kind of a vibe with the pentacle suit, which was really fun. I really liked it, and I still do. I think this is a great Three of Swords. I could not read with it, and that was just a lesson in I can love the art, I can love each individual card. That doesn't mean that in practice it's going to be a good reader. Okay, one more. Finally, we come to the Star Spinner Tarot. I will say the Star Spinner and the Tarot at the End of the Rainbow, I wasn't 100% set on moving on. And then I asked my sister if she wanted them, and she said yes. So they kind of moved from my room to her desk until I moved out. And so that was a bit of like a transition for me to decide if I really wanted to say goodbye to them, because it would have been quite easy to be like, hey, actually give me that back. I loved the idea of this. First of all, inclusive variety of lovers cards. There were 4 different options for the lovers. I wonder if we see any more of them. So you could pick, well, you could keep all of them in if you wanted, but you could pick which iteration of the lovers you wanted to have in your deck. I don't think we've got any more examples of them here. Again, colors are beautiful, the illustration's really fun. I liked that it was queer, because that's part of the reason for having 4 different lovers cards. There's like this one looks like it's 2 male figures, there's ones that are more ambiguous, there's ones that's like a straight couple. You can choose what you want to see in your deck, which I love that. I think that's great. And I also like that this was inspired by fairy tales, folklore, stories. The problem, or not the problem, but the thing I was disappointed about was that the guidebook did not reference which story any given card was from. Like some of them were obvious to me, like none of these examples. Some of them were more straightforward to me, like I think the Something of Cups is the Little Mermaid. There were a few that I recognized, but there's lots that I don't recognize because they're from different traditions. The like King of Wands with this raven is one, the sun and the moon. There's a lot of stories from different Asian folklore traditions that I'm just not familiar with, and so I didn't know the story behind the card, and the guidebook didn't tell me what the story was. So that was quite disappointing. I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity. But the main reason I passed this deck along was because the one suit is so pippish and kind of like these are all gorgeous. If the whole deck was like this, I don't think I would have had a problem. But the one suit, which they're not showing you here, was really kind of pippish. Like, here's one. This is the ten of wands? Yeah, this is the 10 of wands, which is odd because at first I thought it was the 8. But the one suit was kind of pippish and it felt like maybe the artist hadn't had enough time to complete the deck. I think we see this in a lot of decks. I think also sometimes artists probably run out of steam because 78 is a lot of cards to illustrate. That was my main issue when it came to reading it, because some of the cards were really illustrated and gorgeous, and then the ones were kind of pippy, and it kind of took me out of it a little bit. And also the cardstock sucked, and my printing was really wonky. And like I said about the Ask the Witch tarot, if I love the deck, I don't care if the cardstock is shit. I have a lot of decks that I love with terrible cardstock. But if I'm already kind of meh on the deck and the experience of using it physically isn't good, I'm probably not going to touch it. And that was kind of the case with this one. So it's really pretty. I have since nearly bought the Tower of the Divine so many times because I know that is a deck where each card is inspired by a story, a fairy tale, a folklore tale from all around the world, and the guidebook tells you which one every card represents. I don't really know why I haven't bought that. I think maybe this deck soured me on fairy tale decks. Anyhow, that was the final deck in this little video. All right, that is it from me for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I really hope you have enjoyed. I really appreciate you spending some time with me. Do let me know what decks you've got rid of. I would also love to know if you love any of the decks that I have said goodbye to, particularly if you've just had a very different experience. I think it's really interesting how everybody has a slightly different practice, interacts with decks slightly differently. But I will say goodbye. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to see more from me, my Patreon is linked in the description below, along with a link to my Etsy store for my readings and tarot spread zines. Give me a like if you like this one, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.